Hey guys, today we're going to talk about ratios. This will be 2 pages of notes. On the right side are going to be the examples, the handout you got in class. Left side we're going to go through a couple of different examples. Just to let you know, I may need 2 screens for this, but we're going to work on. So let's start with what on earth do I mean by a ratio? Actually, we've talked about this word before. A ratio is a comparison of 2 quantities using division. Okay, and this should sound familiar to you, aka also known as a fraction. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we're talking about 2 quantities, generally speaking, they have the same label. When they don't, then that's going to be rates. But you're going to see that we are going to talk about 2 different objects that are related to somehow to each other. So we're going to talk about some shapes, and you'll see, mainly shapes is what we're going to be talking about. So let's get into this. Let's talk about how do we write ratios. So ways to write ratios. So we actually have 3 ways, one of which is ratios. One is a fraction. But let's have an example here. Let's have some oval shapes. And let's have some x's. Okay. So what we're going to do in our ratio is we're going to compare ovals to x's. Okay? Now, the order that I write things is the order that I'm going to put them into my ratio. So first would come the ovals, second it's going to come the x's. Now, because these can be written as a fraction, we need to remember that we can always reduce fractions or ratios. So we're always reduce ratios just like we would fractions. Okay, now 2 of the forms are not going to look like fractions. So let's talk about it. First one, we want to compare our ovals to x's. So I count up how many ovals I have. I see I have 3. And then I'm going to use words. And the word I'm going to use is the word 2. And I'm going to count up all of my x's, and there are 4. So my ratio of ovals to x's is 3 to 4. So this is the first way using words. Okay? The second way looks similar, except for instead of the word, when we compare our ovals and our x's, we're going to use a colon. So I'm going to say colon. And the last way will be our fraction. So 3 compared to 4. So 3 ovals compared to 4 x's. So that's our fraction. So these are the 3 ways that you can write a ratio. All right, I think I am going to go to the next screen, so hold on a second. Okay, so now we're going to talk about ways to compare ratios. Ways to compare ratios. So you should still be on page 1. Okay, so you're going to see, like in your homework, it's going to ask you to explain the meaning of your ratio. All right, in order to do this, we're going to have to draw some figures. So I've got 2 circles. I've got 3 triangles. And I have 4, we'll call them squares. Okay? So there's 2 basic ways to compare ratios. The first way is going to be part to part. So when you're looking at these pictures here, you're going to compare, let's say, circles to triangles, or circles to squares, or triangles to squares, or we could go the other direction, squares to triangles, squares to circles. Okay? So that's going to be part to part. So let's focus in on that, and then on the right side, we'll add in the second way. So let's start with an example. Let's do triangles. We want to compare triangles to squares. Okay, so what I'm going to do is draw a little mini picture of my triangles. So I have 1, 2, 3. Remember, they're written first. I'm going to write it as a fraction. And then over my squares, and I've got 4 little mini ones. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so if I take those and I write them with values, that would be 3 to 4 with the ratio written as a fraction. Now, again, we have 3 ways to do this. In addition to a fraction, we could also write it with words. So 3, and then the word 2, and then 4. So triangles first, squares next, and then the other way would be 3, and then the colon, and then the 4. So again, comparing our triangles to our squares. Now, how do I explain what this means? So what you see in purple is going to be kind of a frame, and what you see in colors matches what we have going on in this particular comparison. So for every, and then we're talking about the first word, the triangles, and we look at our ratio, and it's simplified. So we're going to say for every 3 triangles, there are, and then we're going to talk about the bottom of our ratio, or the second value in the ratio, 4 squares. So again, when I explain the meaning, what does the 3 mean? What does the 4 mean? And we're also using a comparison. For every 3 triangles, there are 4 squares. All right, let's try another example. Let's do circles. And we want to compare circles to squares. I'll draw a little line here so we separate them. Okay, so I'm going to draw a little picture. I have 2 circles, and we're going to pair them to the 4 little squares. Okay, so if I were to write this as my ratio, as a fraction, I would have 2 to 4. Now, remember what we had said on the other page, that we needed to make sure, or my other screen, that we always reduce fractions and ratios. So that's what we're going to do here. I notice they're both even, so I'm going to divide out a 2 from each of them. So my new ratio is going to be 1 to 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Okay? So, again, I could write this ratio with the word 2 or with a colon, but at this point, I'm good, and I'm going to write my explanation. Again, what's in purple is a frame. You should have this in your explanation. For every, and now we're going to go with the reduced answer, for every one circle, there are 2 squares. So we're giving the relationship between our 2 shapes, okay? And that's how I would write that. So how does part to part, how is it different from the next guy, which is part to whole? Okay, so when I talk about whole, I'm talking about all those shapes together, okay? And the part is going to be just the circles or just the triangles or just the squares, or it could be a combination, circles and triangles together, triangles and squares together, circles and squares. So we're going to do one example of these, and we're going to compare triangles to all shapes. Okay, so we're going to have substantially larger number, right? So let's see what we end up with. With triangles, we're going to have 3 of them. And they're going to get compared to 2 little circles, to 3 triangles, and to the total of 4 little squares. Let me extend that fraction bar a little bit more. There we go. And what we're going to do is count up what we have. So when it comes to the triangles, we have 3, and we're going to compare it to all the shapes together. So we have 2, and 3 is 5, and 5 and 4 is 9. So all shapes, I'm going to give them a unique color of red. So that's all the shapes, the 9 of them. But I notice, yep, I can simplify, so I am going to do that. So this direction, top and bottom, I'm going to divide by 3. I know that's kind of hard, but you can see it at the bottom, so you can see what I'm doing. So 3 divided by 3 is going to give me 1, and 9 divided by 3 is going to give me 3. Okay? So again, I could write this as with the word 2. So 1, 2, 3. And I can also write it with colon. 1, and then the colon, which is read exactly the same way, 2, and then the 3. Okay? So what does this actually mean? Now, here's what's weird. How I say what is the meaning, explaining the meaning, my words are going to change now. Because it wouldn't make sense. For every one triangle, there are all shapes, or there are all 3 shapes. That it kind of is a little bit weird. So we're going to say it a little differently. Now we're going to go with the numerator number that goes with the triangles. So 1, and here comes the part that you would write, out of every, and now we're going to talk about the denominator, 3 shapes. Then we're going to go back and kind of talk about the what our top number, what meant. So 1 out of every 3 shapes is a triangle. Ooh, that kind of was weird. Okay. And that's how I'd write the meaning when I was comparing a part to a whole. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and work on that worksheet, and you can see it in action. Okay, so this should be your second page. So the first one says write a ratio in simplest form that compares the number of suns to the number of moons, then explain its meaning. So the suns are apart and the moons are apart. So that's how we're going to keep them straight. Now what I do want you to pay attention to is the way that they wrote these. They talked about the number of sons first, so that's going to go first in my ratio. And then they talked about the number of, oh, that color doesn't show up very well, does it? Let's try another color. The number of moons. Let's see if this one works better. Yeah, that's going to be the second in our ratio, okay? So since I'm not talking about the moons compared to all those figures, I'm talking about the part that are the sun to the part that are the moons, this is a part-to-part comparison. Well, let's do it with the colon. You know what? I'm going to have to get another color here. That's like too phosphorescent for me. Let's try a little darker. That's better. Part to part. So I'm going to take my suns and I'm going to, or my moons first, or no, my suns first, and I'm going to count them up. So let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 suns. Okay? Actually, I was going to do brighter on that one. Let's try that again. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have a 4, and we're going to compare it to the number of moons. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So we have suns on top. And we're going to compare that to the number of moons. Okay? Okay. So then, if you notice, we can simplify this. So let's go ahead and do that. They're both even, so I'm going to divide by 2. And that's going to give me an equivalent ratio. That would give me 2 in the numerator and 3 in the denominator. So now here comes my explanation. Because this is part to part, we start with a for every. For every, and then we mentioned the numerator, 2 suns. Then comes there are. And here comes the moons, 3 moons. And that's how we write a part to part. Okay, next one. Pet store sold the animals listed in the table in 1 week. Write the ratio of cats to pets sold that week. All right, so cats was mentioned first, and pets were mentioned second. Now, pets are all of them, okay? So when I look at this, this isn't a part to part now. This is a part to all the animals, or part to whole. That looks like parf. How about if we switch that up and make it look a little prettier? There we go. So then we've got the number of cats is 8, and we're going to compare that to all of the animals. So we're going to add up how many animals we have. 10 and 4 is 24, 24 and 8 is going to give me a total of 32. So again, we've got cats on the top over pets on the bottom. Okay. And then again, we can reduce. They both have an 8 in common, so I'm going to divide an 8 out of both of them. And that's going to be equal to 1 per 4. So 1 cat per 4 pets. All right, so now we're going to say this a little bit differently because it is a part to whole, we're going to say 1, and then we're going to put in the frame part, out of every. Then we're going to talk about the denominator. 4 pets is, and then we're going to talk about what the 1 represented, a cat. And there's my sentence. All right, one more and then we are done. Katie wants to divide her 30 flowers into 2 groups so that the ratio is 2 to 3. So how many flowers are in each group? All right, so what this makes me think about is drawing some boxes. So one group has 2 boxes. The other group has 3 boxes. Now, what's inside of each of those boxes has to be the same exact number. So this is where I'm going to use my little thinking cap and say, well, if I have 30 flowers, I'm going to split it into 5 groups. And what that should give me is 6 flowers per group. So I'm going to put a 6 in each of these boxes. So for me to find my answer, what I need to do is add up what's in the boxes. So you can see here on the top, I have 12, and in the bottom, I have 18. So what I can say, and I'm going to spill this over to the right of where I'm writing. So there were 12 flowers in one group and 18 flowers in the second group. All right, and that does it for us today, and I look forward to talking to you about this tomorrow, and we'll practice it together. All right, have a good night.